Good morning. Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 3. We are at the bottom of page 1315. Aleph Shin Tes Vav, 1315. We learned yesterday, not a conclusion, but he summed up the entire discussion about the difference between, about the purpose of existence. The purpose of a person being put in this world is to radiate and illuminate the dark world, meaning dark as in concealing its purpose, concealing its divine purpose, by awakening the divine soul to the point that it shines, contemplates, feels godliness. It also spills over and affects the animal soul. And all this illuminates and dissipates the darkness, but that's not enough. We have to also transform it. So the long discussion about expanding the boundaries, the territory, the domain of holiness of Eir. But then there's also the deeper next step, the ultimate step, I should say, is the very transformation of the Chesed itself, or what he called in the Tzutzik Dusha, that should radiate itself, not just increase in Eir. And he concluded by saying, yesterday we learned that by a Beinoni, for instance, like he says in Tanya, you could subdue, and more than that, even have the animal soul go along with the divine soul, but it's not be'etzem mahus. You haven't fundamentally changed it. It says tzaddikim, he said, tzaddikim gemurim, and Baalei Teshuva amitim have that capacity of total ischapcha chashech l'nehera mamish, transformation of darkness to light, but that will be explained later. So we have these two states. One is where Yichud Havaya and Elikim, that Elikim, even though on its own it's concealed, but now it's shining with Havaya. That's more the power of Eir, that's pierced the darkness, and the darkness is dissipated due to the Eir. But then there's the Gili of Shem Havaya itself. I'm sorry, Shem Elikim itself. The Gil Mamish of Shem, that Shem Elikim, Atzmei Yoir. Again, like Cheshach Atzmei Yoir, that itself should radiate. And then he concluded in the last paragraph that in that itself, there's also two possibilities, two states, two states. One, two efanim, two ways, two methods. That the Cheshach, they both transform the darkness itself, but one is that the light does it, and the other that the darkness itself gets transformed. And he says, even though in both cases it's transformed, there's a hefresh gadol, a big difference between them, because when it's on its own, then the Cheshach itself is radiating. And when it comes to Eir, is the Eir has now replaced the Cheshach. So even though the Cheshach has become Eir, but it's not on its own. The Cheshach itself has been replaced by Eir. So it's not quite the full transformation. And to understand all this, we began to discuss the narrative, the story of Vayireu, the bitter waters being sweetened in the Pasha B'Shalach. So I'm summing up what we learned, and then I want to add a few things, just an explanation here. So he brought a bunch of sources of what was the process here. So the Jews came to Marasa. They couldn't drink the water because it was bitter. So God extended and shot, so to speak, a piece of wood, a branch, that was into the water, and it sweetened the water. What kind of branch was it? So the Medrash, she brings that this was the process of healing. I present to you healing that will heal you from all your afflictions, from all your wounds.
It doesn't say branch. Vayirei Hashem eitz.
Eitz. Yeah, but afterwards it seems like it's a branch from a tree, but maybe it could be the tree itself. Okay, so he says the Medrash, so it's not just a healing. The healing is coming from the very wound itself. And he says, we learned this from Mora. That's what the Medrash says. Where the Eibishter indicated, showed Moshe something bitter, and then gave them a bitter piece of wood or tree or branch, and that itself sweetened it. And he brought the different opinions, whether it's olive, whether it's willow or whether it's the what do we say, the berries, the poisonous berries, the natfuni. But bottom line, it was an 8 smad, and that sweetened it. Also brought from Alisha, where the water was sweetened through salt, not through sugar. From the Zohar says, I'm just summing up what we learned, that ein eitz elo teira, that when you say eitz, you're referring to teira, eitz chayim. So according to the Zohar, is the eitz achayim. The Rebbe Rasha began to explain, so what's the story here? What's happening here? Based on all these different sources, we can understand the deeper meaning of the story because, as I said, not that he asked the question, but it's an obvious question. Why did God make it that has to be this whole elaborate process? Let them drink water. Give them water, let it be regular water, sweet water, and that's it. No, but this is a whole process of transforming the gvuris of this world into sweetness and how you do it. So he explains, the inyan of this is that Mei Mora is the level of gvuris, and he brought a bunch of sources. Me'er Eir, that Mayim has Chesed and Gvura. The Yer Nesiv brings from the Zohar. The higher waters and the lower waters is Chesed and Gvura. Is also compared to masculine and feminine energy, with the higher waters being the Chesadim that are encompassed in Zah, and the masculine, and the lower is the Gvuras of Zah that go down into Malchus, the feminine. And he brings Maris from the side of Dinim. Gvuras means severities. Also, Malchus is called bitter. With the Dinim and Gvuras, the severities dominate there. And then finally, he brings from another Mora. Mora is Lilis, which is also the negative angels, the troublemakers. The Gvuras and Dinim of Malchus, with his Anachizis HaChitzenim, where the outer forces, the negative forces, are able to glean energy from. She calls it Klippas Nega, which grasps itself, it holds on to Gvura. And then finally, now we know what Mei Mora is, now we understand the process. That this whole story is coming to tell us how do we sweeten. Not just you want to sweeten them, you want that they should be sweetened by the very bitterness, by the makkah itself, the wound itself should be the source of healing. And that's where we stopped at the bottom of page 1315. I'll continue now from there. But I just wanted to say one thing. Someone sent me, I think, a question. I just want to give an example because though we're going to get back to it at length, but just to make it a little more palatable, the idea that he spoke before about the difference between the focus being on oir or choshech, and even the transformation of darkness in two different ways. This is the most, I think, balbatish or practical example for it would be, and it's also an application of this whole to all our lives, is I'm going to use the example of tzaddikim and Baalei Tshuva, but also in the world of healing. So in the broadest sense of the word, we live in a world where obviously nothing is perfect. And we have, unfortunately, different things that break us. Losses, wounds, abuse, trauma. The question is, when you heal, so you can look at healing in several different ways. One way is, okay, something happened bad. Think of a disease, an illness, and thank God for medicine and for intervention and doctors. Found a way to fight the illness till you go back to full health. You may even be stronger than ever, because once you eliminated it, you're able to build up new immunity. But the bottom line is the very illness and its pain and the aggravation and everything that came with it. That is not what we transformed. What you did was you brought healing in that place and you overpowered the disease and thank God, eliminated it. Now you could say, what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that, but when it comes to the purpose of existence, transformation, as I've explained a number of times, God does not just want us to redeem the light from the darkness and say, okay, you suffered 2,000 years in Golus. Now you're coming to the Gula, so no more suffering, but also Oitcha Hashem Kenaftabi, which means we also thank God for the affliction itself because there's something in it that needs to be transformed. So a Baal Tshuva could be someone lived his life, his or her life, one way, not getting into whether they tinik shenishba or not tinik shenishba. That's another discussion. We're not talking about whether someone's guilty or not guilty. Even if they're completely faultless because they didn't know better, but they lived a life, they didn't know about Yiddishkeit. Then they could find out about God and what God wants. So going forward, this person changes their life, and going forward, trying to live the best possible life, aligned with the Torah, with God, and so on. What happened with the past? So you say the past, essentially, okay, it ended at a certain point, just like anything. I had an old job, I left my job, I found a new job. I lived in one place, which I discovered is not good for me, and I moved to another place. The past is the past. We're not talking about the person. The person obviously has now moved to another stage, but we can ignore the past. We could even erase it. We could say it's no longer. It was a mistake I made. A deliberate ignorance, whatever it may be. Again, this is not a point of right now culpability. It's more of an issue, just a process. But can you call it ishapche chashech al-nahira? You could say what he says in Tanya, the next step. Not only did I grow out of my past, not only did I heal from an illness, but also the illness catapulted me to now a whole new level of appreciation of what health is. Like he says in Tanya, someone who's thirsty, appreciates the water, and their passion for it is much stronger. That's why the tshuva ma'ava, the ava of tshuva, for someone who was parched and didn't have that ava, is far deeper and has the power to transform even the zdeinis kazachis. But what does the transformation consist of? The person has become stronger. Not that the very sin or the very transgression or the very darkness has become light. It's become a catalyst for light. So yes, the illness has caused the person to become a healthier person, even healthier than someone who never had the illness. So it's still, the cheshech is, yes, now you can say been redeemed, not just that you left it behind, but it's also contributing to the health. But it's still not what he calls total transformation until you can actually say that the illness itself, that I've learned something or something happened during the time when I was in that state that I now can use in Kedusha. And it's not because it increases in my appreciation of holiness and godliness. That's one thing. That's, like you said before, bitter hanetzutzis definitely increases and makes the kelim of Atzilus receive etzema higher energy, because bitter hanetzutzis comes from sparks that come from toyu, from higher levels. So it definitely increases energy, also qualitative. But it's still, the focus is on the energy going forward. It's not on the very illness itself. But when a person, for example, grew up in an environment where did something that were forbidden, even forbidden, I'm saying, and from that they turn it into something that now becomes that only the forbidden could have taught them to be this way. It's not just that they're now more passionate about God, they're actually using that which they learned in darkness, that the darkness itself becomes the source of healing. Just like a person who's been, God forbid, abused or hurt, knows something about abuse that can help another person who's been abused, sorry. But we'll learn more about this. I just wanted to add some practical example of different levels of healing. What I really describe with 3 levels, which fit to what he said here. One is that you move forward and you just, the past is erased, is no longer part of my life. Second is that the past informs the future because it adds to your passion. And the third is the ultimate, when the very negative turns into a positive, which is what he's focusing now with the Meimora. It's not enough that it's sweetened, the waters get sweetened. They get sweetened from the very bitterness itself. The bitterness has become sweet. Now, he hasn't explained it yet, but we're just beginning. I just wanted to add that into the discussion here.
Rab Lazar ben Dordaya, nasu lo kizochius.
Well, we can touch it on many levels, but I don't want to go further right now. I'd rather go back to what we're learning here, but that's what I wanted to add, yeah. the sparks that are on Shalosh Klippos HaTmeis, when they're redeemed, they are going to be the ultimate transformation of Cheshech into Oyer. It says, Deinos Laslei Kazachis, Chassidus explains, it's the sparks in the deliberate sins, transgressions, because the Deinos themselves, the actual crime, like if a person, God forbid, murdered someone, the murder will never become Kedusha. The murder has to be Shvirosan Zu Takanosan, has to be completely destroyed and eliminated. But what this person has learned from it can inform, not just that he becomes a better person, that he can, in a way, do something with that only a person who was in that place could contribute. But we'll need to talk about this some more. So now he continues. I'm continuing from the last 3 lines from the bottom of page 1315. So he said, that the gvuras themselves, the severities themselves, like we learned earlier, that the prosecutor becomes defense. Not just that the defense attorney wins the court case for the merit of the accused, like we learned about Rosh Hashanah. That's an achievement where Chesedim overpowered Gvura and won out. But the Gvura themselves get transformed. That God, I said shot, he like we say, shoot the bow and arrow, Yoda. The Hebrew word for shooting is Yoda, Yerei Hashem Eitz.
He showed him, not shouting. He showed, Hashem
showed Moshe. That's the Hera. He showed him an Eitz. He showed him an Eitz. That's what it means. I thought it meant that he shot the Eitz. Okay.
No. Vayerei Hashem Eitz. He saw after Hashem showed him, he threw this Eitz Elamoim.
Okay. Vayimtuku, and what did it achieve? It sweetened the waters. The movement al pi poshet, says the Rebbe Rashab now. On an ostensible level, al pi poshet, on basic level, the story in Chumash, the ene be'erech she'etz yamtik hamayim, that you can't compare that the eitz, that this branch or tree sweetens the water, even if it causes it to be very sweet. In other words, even if this branch was a very sweet one and caused the water to be very sweet, that's not what the pasuk is saying. Even al pi poshet. In other words, he's saying even the pshat, the basic pshat, is that the sweetness comes from the bitterness itself. That the ma'ad nasa mosuk be'etzem. So it's one thing, you have, let's say, bitter water, and you pour sugar into it. Or not sugar, you pour sweet water into it. You pour enough water, sweet water rather, it'll overpower and override the bitter, to the point it could even be sweeter than it would ever have been because you put so much sweet water. But that's not that the ma'ad nasa mosuk. That's not the bitterness became sweet. That means that something else caused it to be sweet. He says, you're talking here, that the talk is that the mar atz nasa mosuk be'etzem, that there was a fundamental change, that the bitter water itself became sweet. Now, honestly, when I look at it, why is it poshet? Why can't you say maybe there's 2 ways to see it? No problem to explain it deeper, but why is it definitely the pshat? It seems like the words vayimtuku hamayim is the key, because it says the waters got sweetened. So I think when you read it poshet, it means the water itself became sweet, not just the sweetness that you instilled in it made it sweet. I think he said this earlier also when he brought it on page 1307. He said these words: "Hariksiv vayimtuku hamayim shenasa mesukim be'etzem." And when you say vayimtuku hamayim, you don't just mean you sweeten the water with an outside sweetener, like you would sweeten, let's say, coffee with sugar or artificial sugar, but that the water becomes sweet be'etzem. It's very clear that he's saying that as the pshat in the pasuk. Maybe someone has something to add to that, but that's what he's saying for sure. So the ene be'erech she'etz yamtik hamayim afilu yimaler, rakamtoki shamar. Ukamoy shekosa b'zoyar, like he says in Zoyar b'shalach sham. He quoted before a Zoyar b'shalach. He even gave us the page, Daf Samach, Reish Amid Beis, but he said Eitz Chaim. So he said, Shezeu inyan kateger nasa seneger. Okay, so the Zohar says it explicitly. That the kateger, which is the prosecutor, became the seneger. In Aramaic, kateger is the prosecutor, seneger is the defense. So you could have the defense wins over the prosecutor, but no, the prosecutor becomes the defense. He himself has been changed and transformed. Whereas a moment before, he was prosecuting someone and saying they're guilty. He now is saying, no, they're innocent, or they're meritorious. So that's what the Zohar says specifically. So that's clearly indicates that the sweet itself becomes, the bitter itself becomes sweet. But it's interesting, he calls it api pshat. Okay. I just turned the page 1316 now. We're on top of 1316. So let me stop a moment if anybody wants to comment or ask any questions. If not, I'll just continue to read.
It's interesting that in the beginning he said, Ki morim heim, v'lo yochlu lishtis mayim mimoro ki morim heim. And at the end he said, Vayimtiku hamoyim, that this bitter water, they turn out to be sweet.
Yeah, I know that's what it says. My question I asked was, why can't you teach that the eitz was sweet and therefore it overpowered the bitterness, and now the water is sweet water. When you drink it, the Jews drank sweet water. What's the hechrech? But pashtus is the words. Vayimtu kamayim literally means that the waters themselves are sweet. But you could argue, I mean, let's say the case was what I just said, that the eitz made the water sweet. What would the pasuk say differently? Vayimtu kamayim would also be the result. The end result is the waters are sweet. The question is, what made them sweet? Is it sweetness that made them sweet, or the bitter itself became sweet? I'm not asking a question, Chaz Rishon, the Rebbe Rashab. I'm just trying to see what's the hechrech api pshat that you have to say that way. According to the Zohar, it's very clear. And according to the Havana, the deeper understanding for sure. Listen, the Medrash says it clear. The Medrash says that Lomad Memora, you could bring the Medrash Arai. He says, how do we learn this from Mora? That the Makkah itself, Shani Makkah Behem Ani Merapa Ischa. So it's clearly the Medrash is learning from the story of the bitter waters that is the Makkah itself that's healing. So it's clearly that everybody's learning this way. I was just thinking in the pasuk, when you learn the pasuk itself without the Medrash, without the Zohar, is it muchrech to say that way? It clearly saying yes. I was just analyzing it.
The Medrash said there's mentioning three different days what kind of piece of wood it was.
And they're all bitter. And
the Medrash translates to them very clear. It's a bitter.
Yeah, but that's the Medrash. I was wondering the pasuk from the Medrash. It's clear the pshat. I was wondering what's that pshat. Why is it al pi? He says al pi poshet. Maybe al pi poshet he means that you can't compare, because he doesn't say al pi poshet. That's pshat. He says al pi poshet eine be'erech she'etz yamtik hamayim. Like, what does the eine be'erech mean? You can't compare.
You can compare.
What is the alpi poshet going on? The meaning that the bitter itself becomes sweet, or that you can't compare something that sweetens the bitter and when the bitter itself becomes sweet?
You cannot.
Let's not belabor it. The Havana is clear. I just commenting on the understanding of it. It's all right. As I said, the Medrash is clear that that's ultimately pshat. I think whenever you learn the pasuk, even when we learned it in yeshiva as children, it was always that the bitter became sweet. It wasn't just that it was sweetened, that it was the bitter itself became sweet. I think it was always the way we learned it, which is what he's learning here. Okay.
The way that you learn it, the water was bitter, And you could say also, like you putting something sweet, took it over, challenge it, make the bitter water not to feel it. What he's saying that here the pshat is,
Yeah, for sure.
Would say it's what you're saying, but when you are medayek, you see that the water was bitter, and vayimteku amoim, this bitter water became sweet water.
Agreed. I agree. Yeah. Okay, let's continue on top of page Aleph Shin Tazai, paper page 1316. So he says now he's going to begin to explain this process. Dihini Yadua, because now it's known, she has Beze Fanim Baham Tokas HaGvuras. There's two ways in how you sweeten severities. Ha'echad, hu sha'gvuras nimtokim b'chsadim. That the severities are sweetened in the chsadim. In other words, mix chesed into the equation, into the ingredients, and the gvuras will be sweetened. Like we're discussing. Like the sweetening of bad waters. Here he means, this could be also, there's a word, toxic waters. In good waters, in healthy waters. That due to the sheer volume of the healthy waters, what yofim means nice water and roy means bad water, but it means, toxic water, it could be polluted water, it could be, but bottom line is that due to the sheer volume, ribui hamayim hayofim, of the kamos, of the ribui, the amount, it's like you have a little cup of water that is very smelly water, but you pour in so much good water, hamayim hayofim v'mesukim, shemachmas ribui hamayim hayofim mesukim al hamayim haroim umorim, that due to the overpowering element, that there's so much more of the good or healthy and sweet water over the negative, over the toxic or polluted water and bitter water, yamtiku limirirus hamayim v'nasu gam heim mesukim. That'll sweeten the bitterness. Like I said before, you could have a bitter drink, pour in enough sugar or pour in enough sweetener in it, so the bitter will become sweetened. V'nasu gam heim mesukim, and that too will become sweet. That the drink now, this water that you're drinking is now sweet. So this is the first eifin. This is what we talked about. This is the eifin that it's of course the lower level. Umakol mokim. However, when it's done this way, ena mesikus kamoy mayim mesukim be'etzem. The sweetness in this case is not like something that's fundamentally sweet originally, like sugar and bitterness. Sugar is naturally sweet. Bitter is not naturally. So to say that when you poured enough sweetener, enough sweet water into bitter water, that now everything is sweet, you can't compare it if it was initially all sweet. Imagine the drink was a sweet drink from the beginning and there was no bitterness at all. So you can't say it's the same. Additionally,
Rabbi?
one second, hold on. V'gam hamayim hamasukim nechlash misikusam. And also the other way around. Just like this, the sweet water overpowered and caused the bitter to become sweet, the bitter also affects the sweet part. Al yedei hataruv is b'mayim amorim. So hagam shem is gabrim aleim umamtikim meisam. Hagam shem is gabrim aleim umamtikim meisam. So even though we don't feel it necessarily, but let's say something was a sweet, we'll call it 100% sweet, and now you pour it into a bitter drink. The drink is only 5% of the volume right now. So even though it overpowers the bitterness, but to say that the bitterness has no effect on the sweet, you may not feel it, but you can't say the sweet is completely as it would have been pure, because it's been mixed now with the bitter. So maybe somewhere someone could feel a bit. Again, 5 and 195% may be difficult, but let's say it's 40 and 60%, or 30 and 70. Anyway, the point I'm making is not a question of number, it's more the content here. So number one, it's not as sweet as something that's sweet from the outset when you mix the two. And number two, the bitterness somewhere is going to impact and weaken this, in some way is going to weaken the sweetness. Even though at the end of the day, the sweeter is overpowering the bitter.
Even 5 and 95. Maybe he will feel it less, but in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to say that. Because you can't say the sweetener has overpowered. You can't say that the bitter has lost its bitter taste. It's just there. As a matter of fact, in maybe lach balach, in liquid, it's hard to separate them again once you mix the two. But definitely yavash v'yavash, if you have a bitter food and you have a sweet food and you mix them together and then later you separate them, the bitter food has not become sweet. It's just become mixed with it. Listen, salt or even other things that are bitter, when you put them in a particular dish, they could also contribute to the sweetness in some ways. But when you talk about purely bitter and sweet, it's clear what he's saying here. So he's explained. Now, this is all in the mushal. In the nimshal, it's very clear. For example, I mentioned before, you're talking about, let's say, a battle between two enemies. They fight a battle. One wins. Now, the enemy may surrender, and they may even agree and say, we'll cooperate with you. But has the enemy really been transformed? Or you've overpowered them, and it's convenient for them to cooperate with you. So even if it's a 5%, that part of the enemy remains 5%, but it's still there. And somewhere it's going to create some problem. And as well, it's not the same when you are working with your allies and your family than when you have conquered another city that hated you until now. So even though maybe you convince them and they're going to cooperate and they may be subdued for a while, but it's not the same. I'm just pointing out that when you apply it to the moral, a general picture of it, it's very clear what he's saying here. Okay.
Rabbi? 1
minute, 1 second. I just want to see where to finish a phrase here. I don't want to just stop.
Jacobson, please correct how many percent.
One second. I said, give me a moment. I'm just looking. I'm trying to teach it inside. I want to just see where it goes now. 1 second. Okay, he's going to give example with food actually now, with actually a dish, when you prepare a dish. You want to ask some questions? Go ahead. We can stop here.
Jacobson, sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just looking at a lot of commentaries on Sefaria on this pasuk, Yimtiku Amayim, and the Malbim teaches that it's like a refuah. It's like someone that's sick, but then when you add medicine, that the thing itself becomes healthier. So it sounds like look, that's just one interpretation, but why can't
we don't
you
need
say,
the Malbim. The Medrash says it explicitly. The Medrash says it, that he quoted the Medrash explicitly that says it, that from the very illness, he's creating healing. And that's what he brought the proof from Mara. So that's the interpretation we understand. I was not wondering about the interpretation. I was wondering, must you say that shot in the pasuk if you don't have the Medrash or the Zohar? That's what I was discussing.
Rabbi Jacobson, why can't we just say that instead of the mixture of how many percentage of sweet versus bitter, to say that the waters were instead of saying giving it percentages of what overpowers what or what transforms, why can't we say that the bitter waters still stay bitter as for in essence, but we were able to taste the sweetness?
We're saying. I was just speaking about it in practical terms.
Okay.
That is what we're saying. The bitterness remains bitter, and number one, it's even when it's sweet now, it's not like sweetness of something that was initially only sweet, 100% sweet. And on the other hand, it also weakens somewhat the sweetness of the sweeter water. We are saying that. That's correct. I was using the percent just to make it more palpable, something more practical, so you understand it in context. That's all.
This actually makes it more complicated, because if the Midrash is saying that the bitterness
which topic are we talking about now? Your question
sweetening,
or
no, the general topic. The water becomes sweet. If it mamish becomes sweet be'etzem, then there's no more bitterness. It's not a mixture of sweet.
But that's the second Eifen. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining two different ways. This way is not what he's talking about before. This is an explanation of everything we learned till now. He began by saying the bitterness becomes sweet. Now he says there's two efanim, and we haven't finished the second eifan yet. The second way is going to be the bitter itself becomes sweet. Now we're talking about the first way.
I got okay. Seems like that's the second way is what the midrash is.
We're in the middle of learning it. This is the Rebbe Rashab started now two efanim. He said the first eifan is to sweeten something is by bringing in more sweet water, and he explained the limitations of that. Okay. That's what we're in the middle of. That's the first eifan. We're in the middle of discussing that first method. As I started, this is part of the whole discussion. He's discussing different ways of how you sweeten water, or
got it.
How you sweeten something bitter.
Got it.
What did you want? Anybody wanted to ask or add anything? Okay. U'k'moi Cain, I'm on line 5. So he just gave the example with water. So you made the bitter sweet, but you haven't really transformed it. What you've done is you've overpowered it. So now it's like anything, a sweetener in any drink that makes the drink sweet. And he said both ends, the sweetness is not as it would have been sweet if it was only pure sweetness. And also the bitter somewhat weakens the sweet, even when the sweet is dominant and overpowering over the bitterness. He's now going to bring an example in food. This was drink. How do you translate sonnen? Is it spice? Not spice. Is it cinnamon?
No, radish. Snoin bidvash.
Radish in honey?
Yeah.
Is that a dish? Is that a dish?
Yeah, I think when the Alter Rebbe was in jail, they used to bring him in, the Chassidim, because they want to put a message. So under the special mirkachas, that I think it was Snoin and Dvash, they put a message. It's a concept, Snoin bidvash.
No. I've heard the concept, but I always wondered if anyone actually makes something radish in honey. It doesn't seem like they mix together. But one thing is for sure, honey is sweet and sonnen is bitter. So he says, what?
Snoin is the concept.
I understand, but he's talking here of food. So he says like this: so mesikus hacharifus, it's sonnen bidvash. That when you put something that sonnen is, it doesn't say bitter, it's sharp. It's a sharp tasting food. Sharp. And when you mix it dvash and honey, he says, so when you the sweetening of the sharpness of sonnen bidvash, hamosuk be'etzem, dvash is fundamentally as its core, it's sweet, very sweet. The afal pisha nepach tam achorif, the mesikos. So even though you've taken the sharp taste and you've transformed it into sweetness, ein zeh shenishapich hamar be'etzem. Does not indicate that the very bitterness or the sharpness has fundamentally changed. Ki etzem hamayim hamarim, because the very bitter waters, or in the second example, hatson and hacharif, or the sharp radish, lo nishtanu be'etzem husam. They haven't changed. You haven't changed them. They're still in there. They still maintain their personality and their taste. They didn't change at all. Because it remains bitter and sharp the way it was. The only thing, it was sweetened by some outside force that imposed itself, so to speak, on it. And that's how it got sweetened. But nothing changed. It's not like you went and miraculously made radish no longer be sharp, or bitter no longer to be sweet, no longer to be bitter, or changed. You didn't change anything. It's interesting how much arichas is giving here. Here he goes, hamarkachas, like a dish. The mesikus hatzonen, like a dish, of the sweetened radish. It's not at all due to the very personality or very identity of the entity itself. There's no change. It's clearly that there's a dish like this. I have to look into this a bit. I've never seen it anywhere. Maybe somewhere in the world they make radish with honey. I have to check with the culinary experts. But bottom line is,
there's sweet and sour chicken.
Sweet and sour chicken, maybe. That's a good one. That's good, yeah. Anyway, interesting. Okay. So he says, like a dish. It's not you didn't create any shinui in the very core of the bitter food. The only thing is you've extended it, you've drawn into it, you've mixed into it. You've drawn into it and mixed into it, and hurkav and mixed into it. Mitam hamesikus, from a taste, from a sweet taste. Haba mitzad achar, that came from another place, from a different food, from a different place. Shehu mesikus advash. In this case, the sweetness of the sweetness of the honey. Like when you cook them together. So what happens? So the radish, the sharp radish, is receiving from the sweetness of the honey when you cook it. You put them together. It's not just you mix them, you cook them. The cooking causes them to become a conglomerate, a type of composite, a mix. Oh, no, I didn't read the nigun right. Let me reread it. By cooking them together, just as the sharp radish receives a sweet taste from the honey through cooking, the same goes the other way around. The sweetness of the honey is also absorbing some of the bitterness, or not bitterness, the sharpness of the radish, and that were mixed together through cooking them in one pot. And from these two diametric opposite, from these two opposite tastes, you now got a mix from these two mixed, and tam echad hamozug mishneim yachad. You now have something that is a mix of both tastes combined together, mixed and joined and fused together. V'hu tam hakiyua sheyesh ba mitam hamesikus v'achrifus yachad. What's kiyua? I've seen this a number of places in Chassidus, to be honest. I never figured out what it means. I think it goes back to the culinary discussion.
It's a combining taste. It's a new taste. It's combined from both of them, but now it's a new type of taste.
It's like a dish. What do you think? Kiyua and markachas is just a dish. Okay.
No, merkachas is you combine.
I think it's coffee.
You think it's coffee?
I think it's coffee.
No.
Okay.
I don't think
know
so.
not?
Okay.
How are you sure it's not?
Because I am not sure, but I think that kiyua is some kind of a taste that it's not two different tastes. No, I
understand the pshat, we understand, but it looks like, to me, it looks like it's a particular dish that has a name kiyua.
Right.
Some type of. But coffee is coffee beans, and you mix sugar in it. Here is looks like kiyua. Looks like the dish that's made out of radish and honey. We need to listen. Everybody here knows more about atzilus than I see about the regular breakfast dish.
In Arabic, coffee is kahwa, which is similar to kiyua.
Maybe. But how does it work here? Okay, I'm going to do a little research. I remember learning this when I was in yeshiva in Morristown. We're talking about 40 years ago. I learned this piece, and I remember asking Melech and everybody, and nobody knew. They only knew the ruchnius of it. I asked them, what exactly is this sonim b'dvash, and what is this kiyua? And I remember then, I never got to the bottom of it. But now time has come, we got to figure this out.
Well, the sonim and the dvash is all over the internet. There's and it's interesting. It's brought down as a honey glazed radishes, and
Honey glazed radishes. Oh,
yes, and in fact, it's also brought as a homeopathic cure. Getting back to our homeopathic.
Okay, so hey, that's good. Honey.
Yeah, honey and dvash, and then there's black radishes and red radishes, but they have both. But there's the black radishes seems to be used in honey. Used to be for
Eliezer, maybe you want to prepare a dish for all of us and send us a sample.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask my wife to do that. She likes radishes, so that's a good idea. Try that. One of the recipes there said if you try honey and radishes, you'll want to eat radishes for the rest of your life. It's so good.
Really?
Interesting.
Is it
one
healthy?
of the people?
Is it good for the heart?
It says it's good for the blood pressure.
Okay.
One of the places
you
says
learn Ayin Beis, you start becoming an expert.
Expert.
The Talmud in Shabbos says that kiyua is a fruit vinegar.
Fruit vinegar?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe that's it. Maybe kiyua is fruit vinegar, which is vinegar we know is sharp. Fruit is sweet. Maybe that's what's going on here.
Yeah.
somebody compares what we say in the Agode, Va'ato Hakhei es Shinov.
But that's with a chof. I think that's with a chof.
No, it's not. It's not with the chop. Hake is hey kuf hey hey. It's probably connected. Kiyuha and hake. This is something.
I thought hake shinov means knock out his teeth.
Okay, that's kiyuha. It's a sharp thing, but it's not hake. It's kiyuha. It's a new.
Where Yitzchak? Where in Shabbos? Do you know the daf, the page?
111a.
111a. Okay. Okay, we're going to do a little more research on this. I got the picture. But what the bottom line is, let me just finish the line here. That it's a new taste that's a combination of both. But what he wants to prove with this is that the bitter or the sharp has not been transformed. On the contrary, it even weakens and changes the taste of the sweet. Anyway, I'll stop here because he's still going to go on explaining. I think the Eifen HaBeis is on the bottom of page 1317. So all this is the first Eifen. He's going to talk for almost 2 pages now. This way where sweetness and bitter get together, the sweetness can dominate, but it doesn't transform the bitter itself into sweetness. And Eifen HaBeis will begin in the paragraph at the bottom of page 1317. So just prepare. The rest is all till there is all this Eifen HaAleph, this first manner, which of course is relevant about light and dark, that the light can dissipate the darkness, but doesn't transform the darkness fundamentally. And we're going to learn a number of levels in all of this. So I'm going to stop here by the Kiyua piece, and I'm going to look up. I like that. The fruit vinegar is interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, and Ksubos also, it comes out in Ksubos 75a, it also refers to it as a wine or fruit vinegar.
Okay. Once you have one, the Gemaras will send you to each other. The thing is, the question is there any connection to the glazed radishes that he's bringing? Because here, Utama Kiyua. Okay. So we'll stop here, middle of page 1316.